Welcome everybody. My name's Ant Parsons. I'm from ALP Synergy Limited, and tonight we're going to be talking all about the wonder of bees. Now, this is one of many webinars that we're delivering as part of a national program all around connecting communities with nature. So it's fully funded by the Natural Environment Research Council, or NERC, which are part of the UK Research and Innovation Organisation. So this is all about getting some of that really complicated science and translating it to everyday people like me and you. Now, I'm delighted that we have one of those very clever scientists here today, Richard. Richard's just been telling me that he's been buzzing all around the country. He's been at conferences and other things, and I'm using that bee joke deliberately. He's frustrated that he's had to be in conference rooms while it's been sunny outside and all the bees are starting to emerge. And, wildlife and nature is coming to life. When we see that sun in the spring, that's when everything's coming out. So Richard is a very well known, very experienced entomologist, and he's going to take us all through the wonder of bees this evening. So I'm quite excited to hear what you're going to say, Richard. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to everyone about bees. I suppose I will cover this later on, but one of the best things about bees before we start is they are generally only out when it's nice and sunny and warm. So that's kind of one of the reasons they really appeal to me to start with. And I enjoy being out when it's sunny, same as everyone else. And as Ant has said, I was very frustrated on Saturday when it was a beautiful sunny day and I was locked in a conference room. But hopefully tonight I'll talk about bees. I'll sort of introduce some of the bees we have in the UK, talk to you about how they live, their life cycles, why they're important within nature, and hopefully how you can sort of get involved going out and looking for bees, seeing bees in your own backyard or in local parks or anywhere, and sort of hopefully inspire you to sort of connect to the wonder of bees. The wonder of bees. There's some pictures on the front of various different bees. There is a bit of a cheat because one, two, three of those pictures are actually wasps, but there is a reason for that that I'll come to as we progress. But first, I'd sort of like to say a bit about myself. Ant has introduced me as sort of a very clever scientist and an entomologist. Is that going to move to the next slide? There we go. But actually, my background is as a visual artist, sort of originally a visual artist and designer. So my sort of background is in creative industries. And from that, I've sort of worked as a visual artist, a designer maker. I worked as a designer and maker for television. Always had an obsession with nature and natural history. And sort of very lucky over the last 10 years to sort of get into working as an entomologist and sort of pollinator surveyor. So sort of my bee story really started when I was lucky enough to get a commission with Chester Zoo to work with their horticultural team to make a sort of bumblebee garden and engage the public around sort of bumblebees and why they're important. I know Ant's got another talk coming up about bumblebees, so I'm not really going to go into bumblebees in great detail on this talk. I'll save that for the next talk that Ant's got coming up in this series. So I worked with Chester Zoo and created a bumblebee garden. And sort of from a standing start, I knew a little bit about bumblebees, but realised I really needed to sort of get my knowledge up to scratch to deliver this project. And sort of dove, is that the word? Dove into the world of bumblebees, and just became absolutely obsessed with sort of bumblebees. And from there, was very lucky to go and do a couple of training courses. My partner got me a training day with a very, very well-known entomologist called Stephen Falk about solitary bees, and it just ignited a passion in me. And from there, I sort of moved on. Still do the visual art, still interested in creating things and sort of creative engagement and talking to people. But everything I do now has a focus on sort of natural history and especially sort of bees in the UK. And I'm very lucky that I get to go out and about in the sunny weather and survey bees and look at bees and record bees and do research into bees. So a bit about the bees and what is a bee. I think everyone or most people have heard about honeybees and perhaps everyone has heard about bumblebees. But people, I think, are generally surprised that there are hundreds of different types of bee or species of bee within the UK. Um, the main thing to say, and we'll just get over this straight away, is that honeybees are actually domestic animals within the UK. They're not a native species to the UK. They're really sort of the insect equivalent of chickens. They were brought into the UK by the Romans, we think. So I won't be talking about honeybees because not all bees are honeybees. And some of the best bees we have in the UK are not honeybees, and are other types of bees. So what is a bee? It's an insect. It's a flying insect, and it can sting. But a bee, really, in general terms, is a hippie vegetarian wasp. And solitary bees are messy eaters, which is important, and we'll come to why that's important in a little bit. So when I say a bee is a hippie vegetarian wasp, what I mean is that bees are evolved or have descended from wasps, but they've become vegetarians. So they don't eat meat. They eat and they don't feed their young on meat. They provision their young and they only eat plant material. So they're vegetarian. They use pollen from flowers to feed their young and nectar from flowers to fuel themselves. I could say they're hippies because one of the things that defines a bee as opposed to a wasp is they have messy hair. They have terrible split ends. In scientific terms, we call them plumose hairs, so feather-like hairs, which they've evolved or developed in order to collect pollen more effectively. Solitary bees are messy eaters, which is important for pollination. We'll come to that in a little bit. Um, Within the UK, the best way, or across the world, the best way to divide up bees and sort of start thinking about and looking at different types of bees is to split them into two different basic groups. The first of these are the social bees, which are our bombus, so our bumblebees, and our honeybees, apis bees within the genre. I'm not sure, is my pointer showing up? And can you just give brilliant, fantastic. So one of the things to do with this messy eating is our social bees collect the pollen on their legs wet. They mix it with nectar, and hopefully you can see on this honeybee here, there's pollen on its leg in a sort of big clay-like lump. So that's one of the two groups, is the social bees. The other group, which is my favourite and the most important one as far as I'm concerned, is the solitary bees. So this is all of the other bees that aren't social. The terms social and solitary sort of give a clue as to their life cycles and how they are differentiated. The social bees, they have a queen, as you'd have heard of with the honeybees and hopefully the bumblebees. They create a colony, so they live together in a hive or a colony they have created. Each of the colonies has workers who do all the work within the colony, and the queen is the only bee within the colony that can lay eggs. And within the social bees, the generations meet. So the queen bee will meet and look after her offspring. The solitary bees, a single female bee does all of the work on her own. She does not have workers, she does not have help, and she never meets her offspring. So that's kind of the basic difference between the two groups. I'll quickly go through the life cycles just to try and define that a bit more. I'll try and be quick and not go too scientific or too complex with this. So within the bumblebees, at this time of year, around now, the bumblebee queens that have been in their hibernation underground over the whole of winter, avoiding the horrible wet, cold weather, will emerge and start to forage. So if you go out and about at the moment, you'll hopefully see some big bumblebees buzzing around, visiting flowers to fuel up, and then buzzing around on the ground, looking for somewhere to create a nest. Now, the bumblebees nest in disused rodent nests, so they're actually sniffing out mouse or rat wee to find a disused rodent burrow in which to make a nest. The queen bumblebee will then sort of lay an egg, make a wax receptacle to keep the egg within, provision it with pollen and nectar, and eventually the egg will hatch, larvae will develop and eat the pollen, and worker bees will start to emerge. So In a few weeks, hopefully, we'll be seeing smaller bumblebees emerging that are the worker bees. These worker bees will head out to the flowers that hopefully it means spring have started to bloom, and will start collecting pollen and nectar and start provisioning the nest. So there might be hundreds, 200, 300 of these worker bees eventually within the nest. The queen bee at this point will just literally stay within the nest and lay eggs, while the workers do all the work of raising the young. Later in the season, a female who will be the new queen will be born and emerge, and males will emerge and leave the nest. These will mate, and then the new queen, which is fertilized, will return or go and find somewhere to hibernate and hibernate underground over winter, ready to emerge next year and start the new colonies for next year. So that's the social bee or the bumblebee life cycle very quickly. The solitary bee, again, at this time of year, solitary bees are starting to emerge. The males and females emerge, but not from hibernation in the same way. So at this time of year, our spring bees are emerging, and males and females are both emerging from the nest. They will mate. The adult male will disappear and do nothing else once he has mated, and the mated female will do all of the work. She will construct the nest cells, lays the egg, forage for pollen, and provision the nest. So most of her life cycle, most of the bee's life cycle actually happens underground within the nest burrow. The female will gather pollen, lay an egg on the pollen. The egg will be born into a larvae which will eat the pollen and turn into a pupa. And within the nest, it will either stay as a pupa or as a adult bee. It will hibernate within the next nest until next year. And then at the beginning of next spring, adults will emerge, adults will mate, and the cycle will start again. So what's interesting about that is that the actual bees that we see out and about are a very, very small part of the bee's life cycle. The flight period of an individual bee that we're seeing out and about may only be 2 to 3 weeks. Most of its life cycle, up to 50 weeks, may have been underground in its nest burrow. So there's a lot going on that we don't see, which is kind of relevant when we talk about what we can do to look after bees. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense about the two different sort of life cycles and the two different types of bees we're talking about. There's social bees and the solitary bees. I'm really going to focus on talking about the solitary bees because to me they're more exciting. There's a lot more of them. There are, in fact, 290 odd species of bees in the UK, 24 of the social species, which is our bumblebees, and the Apis mellifera, which is our chicken of the bee world. And so that leaves around 265 solitary bee species. So most of the bees in the UK are these solitary species, and they're really, really overlooked. They are everywhere. Wherever you go, where there are flowers or plants, there will be solitary bees, spring, summer, into autumn, but they're really, really overlooked. So these are the ones that really excite me, really interest me, and what I really want to talk to you about tonight. They're amazingly varied. They have an amazing variety of lifestyles. Where they nest includes in the ground, underground. A single female bee will dig a nest burrow up to 2 meters deep in the ground, within which she will make little rooms, little cells in which to lay her egg and provision and for her young to grow up safe and sound underground where it's warm and dry and they're protected from winter. There's then some bees that are aerial nesters, so they nest above ground. They don't dig a burrow in the ground to nest in, but they nest in sort of disused beetle burrows, holes in wood, holes in stone. So these are the aerial nesters. So the kind of species you'd see if you've got a bee hotel or a bug hotel would be aerial nesters that are nesting in the above ground, as it were. And then alongside these, we have things called cuckoo bees. Now, cuckoo bees, the same as the cuckoo bird, sort of don't really do much work. They're a bit sneaky, they're a bit cheeky, but they lay their egg in the nest of another bee rather than doing any work. So there are cuckoo bees that sneak into the nest of ground nesters, and there are cuckoo bees that sneak into the nests of aerial nesters. So within nature, there's always someone, you're doing all this work and to look after young, there's always someone who's going to come along and take the mickey. And within the bee world, it's the cuckoo bees who sort of do that kind of thing. To create these nests and these homes and these safe havens for their young to grow up in, the bees use a really wide variety of different nesting materials. There's our leaf cutter bees that you might have heard of that use leaves and plant material to create nests. There's bees that use mud or resin, so resin from pine trees that they collect and use that to make a safe little home for their young to grow up in. There's bees that use cellophane, not cellophane from crisp packets, but they actually secrete a material that's very similar to cellophane that they paint the inside of their mud nests with using their tongue. And this dries to a very cellophane. It's like a little bag. You can actually find these when the ground's eroded. And it's like a cellophane bag inside which the young grows up. And it's protected from sort of the moisture. It's protected from parasites. It's protected from mold by this cellophane lining that the bee. So it's like a sort of bee sleeping bag or a bee tent that the adult has made from a secretion of her mandibles and painted on the inside of her nest burrow. There are bees that are squatters or renters, so they take over an old beetle boring or a hole that someone else has made. And then there's also a fantastic group of bees within Osmia that nest inside snail shells, which is just a phenomenal thing to have evolved to use a snail shell to make their nest in. And it's just absolutely astonishing. One of the fascinating things with it, to go off on a tangent, on a friend of mine's done some research on some of the military ranges in Pembrokeshire, and the bees there are actually using bullet casings to make their nests in, because there's more bullet casings on the ground than there are snail shells. So they're still shell nesters, but they're military shell nesters. So they're amazingly adaptable, these bees, and some of the things they do are absolutely fantastic and amazing to watch. Here's a little bit of a video, if it will play, of so this is at Dovestone Reservoir, which is near Manchester, and this is a sort of little bee hotel I made and installed there to show people and talk to people about bees. And it's got a hatch on the side that opens so we can look inside and see sort of the bees nesting. So here's a leaf cutter bee coming back with a little bit of nest material. Inside the nest, so this would in the wild be a beetle boring this hole, and she uses this leaf to create a little room to keep her young, the offspring, the egg and the provisions safe and sound. And she has cut that piece of leaf in the exact diameter to fit perfectly within that hole and block off that entrance. The other bits of leaf that are making the sides, the other walls of the hole, will be a different shape and a different size. Absolutely amazing piece of work. And she'll do this repeatedly, backwards and forwards, build a nest, build the room, put provisions, pollen and nectar in, lay an egg, and then the young bee will grow up inside that nest. So bees are tiny. I'll come to how big the biggest bee in the UK is and how small the smallest bee is in a little minute. But they have tiny brains with a minute percentage of the number of neurons that we have, but they have fantastic skills. They can find their way home and locate their own nest within the landscape. And this is a very complex landscape. They're flying. There isn't street maps, there isn't roads, there isn't street signs, but out and about in amongst vegetation, in the garden or in a park, they can find their own nest within a massive landscape. They go out and forage and collect pollen and fly straight back to their nest. They can also, when they're nesting in aggregations where there's hundreds of bees nesting in one place, they can locate their own nest within the aggregation amongst all their neighbours. Not sure how they do it. It might be something to do with pheromones or just very good spatial awareness of where they are. So if you watch a bee leaving its nest, you'll quite often see it circle round, orientate itself, learn where it is before it flies off. They can learn and teach each other. There are some videos of research where bumblebees, and I can put a link in later to sort of some YouTube videos of bumblebees teaching each other how to solve puzzles to get to nectar and pollen. and also Lars Tricker, who did the research, has taught some of them to play football, and when they score a goal, they get a reward. So I can put a link to the YouTube about that. So they're fantastic things, all the things they can do. They can differentiate between different flowers and visit the best flower to get the best pollen and nectar. Um, they use electrostatic force to collect pollen. So as they're flying, they can build up a charge, a static charge, that they then use to collect pollen, which is something that we can't do. We don't really use electrostatic for anything other than maybe sticking balloons to our heads at parties. But bees actually use that same energy to collect pollen from flowers to save themselves a bit of work. And a bee can land or fly near a flower and detect if it has nectar and pollen available with its feet. It doesn't need to go into the shop and find out if the stuff it wants is in there. It can tell as it flies past or hovers nearby whether the produce it needs or the product it wants is available. So they're fantastic things, doing amazing things when they're out and about. And the other thing that interests me with bees is they kind of do things the same as we do. Unlike most insects, but like many animals, they build a safe place for their young to grow. So they look after their young, they provision their young, which is quite rare in the insect world. And they care for their young by providing food resources. So that's one of the things that sort of makes me love the bees. The sort of the something I can link, I can understand, even though they're insects with a tiny brain, I can understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and find that really interesting and sort of really touching, maybe, that they're doing these things to care for their young. A lot of the insects are just firing eggs out willy-nilly. Bees aren't. Bees really do the best they can to look after their young. The beauty of solitary bees, another reason I really, really love the solitary bees, is just the aesthetics of them. They're beautiful, fascinating things to watch. But as I say, my background is in visual arts, so I think this is one of the things that attracts me to solitary bees, is their beauty. They have a wide variety of sizes to start with, and as I said, the smallest bee in the UK is around 3 to 3.5 millimeters long. So it looks like a tiny speck on a flower. But it's still a bee that is digging a nest in the ground and collecting pollen to feed its young, but it is only 3.5 millimeters long. The largest bee in the UK is 22 millimeters long, and there's a thing called Xylocopa vali. I can't speak, um, but I won't. Xylocopa, and it's a fantastic metallic-y blue purple bee. And it's a big, big thing. Nearly, if it sits, it will almost fill the palm of your hand if you manage to see one, if you're lucky enough to see one and catch one. They come in an amazing variety of colours and patterns. We have things called yellow-faced bees that have these crazy yellow markings on different species. And this little video, if it will play, shows a male bee that's actually collecting pheromones, which is like a bee perfume, rubbing them around his body, spreading them along the edge of the leaf in order to attract the ladies. So he's sort of using a sort of a perfume to attract females, and this is something that a lot of the yellow-faced bees do. They come in an amazing variety of colours and patterns. So you've got these really hairy, Andrena and many others are very hairy, all the split ends, of course, as I've mentioned. So they're very, very orange coloured, golden coloured, and sort of pictures of bees often have these sort of stripy abdomens. Very few bees have that, but there is Colites bees within the UK that definitely have this really, really sort of traditional stripy abdomen. When we think of a picture of a bee, we see a stripy animal, and the Colites bees certainly have that. We have things called blood bees. The Spacodes, these are cuckoo bees that have these, they're completely black but with this very cool red abdomen stripe. We have bees that are very, very wasp-like. Now, these are the bees that are kind of reverting to being wasps because they don't only work, they're the cuckoo bees, they lay their eggs in someone else's nest. So they look really, really wasp-like. And this fella in the middle, and this is a male, is actually asleep. So this is how bees, if they're male bees, they don't go back to a nest burrow to sleep. They'll stay out and about, sheltered somewhere. So this is a bee actually clamped onto a leaf with its mandibles and just hanging there asleep one afternoon when it was a bit too cold to be flying around. So if anyone asks you where do male bees sleep, they quite often sleep like this, hanging from a plant by their mandibles. We have things called pointy bum bees. That isn't the official scientific name for them, but you can tell these Coleoxys bees have this pointy bum. The males have these spikes on the end for fighting each other, for females, and the females have this point here because these are cuckoo bees that prey on leafcutter bees. So she uses her pointy bum to cut a hole through the leaves to lay her egg in the nest of a leafcutter bee. So she's kind of got a blade for cutting her way into someone else's tent or breaking into someone else's house to lay her egg in someone else's nursery. We have fantastically coloured and patterned bees. These are what are called painted or clown bees, which are sort of Apiolus. These are all UK species. None of these are sort of tropical bees. These are all things, and 90% of these photos are photos I've taken sort of locally here. So you will, if you go out and start looking at bees, you will see a wide variety of different bees. We have tiny little metallic bees, and one of the pictures has disappeared. So some of these bees are metallic, sort of bronze and metallic green, but generally the smaller bees. So you have to look very, very closely to see these beautiful metallic colours. So hopefully that has given you a very quick overview. I'm talking very fast because we've got limited time. Very quick overview of sort of the wonder of bees and the astonishing variety, the kind of things they might be up to, and what you can see if you go out in your garden, in your park, and start looking carefully for bees. I think the important thing to say here is that if you're watching solitary bees, they are safe. They can sting. They are very unlikely to sting a person unless you really, 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 really wind them up. I think I've been once stung by a solitary bee because I had it in a net when I was looking at it and was then talking to someone and not concentrating on what I was doing. Most of them are so small that even if they did try to sting us, the sting wouldn't penetrate our skin. So they are safe to watch. There's nothing to worry about. Social bees have a big resource to defend, the colony, the nest full of honey and their young. So social bees are more likely to sting, and honeybees can be especially aggressive. So be aware, don't go and watch honeybee hives because you are likely to get stung. But solitary bees are fine to watch. So I suppose if you want to go out and look at bees and watch solitary bees, which I recommend to everyone because it's a great thing to be doing, recognizing what is and what isn't a bee is sort of the first stage that you'd need to get into. Many flies and other insects are mimics of bees, so it can be quite tricky. These pictures here, both of these are actually flies, but they're quite bee-like with these stripes and the sort of black and yellow coloration. They're mimicking bees because bees can sting a predator like a bird. So if the bird thinks this fly can sting them, they're not going to get eaten. So they mimic bees because bees are sort of well-hard, I suppose. So the first thing, if you look at books about bees, you'll be confronted by all this sort of esoteric scientific terminology, wing venation, mesenotum, clypeus. Ignore all of that. You don't need to know all of that until you get into it. I wish I'd got into it a different way, but I learned all this when I started, and it's not the easiest way to get into bees. You don't need to know all of this. When you go out and about, the first thing to look at is how many wings has the thing's got? Is it a fly? Is it a bee? A bee has two wings. A fly has two wings. A bee has four wings. But that's pretty hard to see if they're just on the flower. It can look like they've just got two wings, or you can't count how many they've got. So a better way to look at it is the antenna or the eye shape. Now, the antennas are the sort of feelers, the sort of sensory organs, the sort of nose of the bee or the fly. They're a chemical sensory organ on the head of the insect. With the flies generally have a really short, sort of stubby or stumpy in scientific terms, antenna, and the bees have these long thread-like antennae. So if you see an insect on a flower and have a close look, you can generally tell, is it a wasp or bee by the antenna, or is it a fly by the short antenna? The mouth part's the difference between flies and bees. The bees, as we've said, are building homes. They're manipulating materials to make a nest. So they have mandibles. They have these sort of spiky jaws that they use for moving materials about and building a nest. Flies don't have this. They just have a tongue. But both types of insects will be visiting flowers to drink nectar. If the insect is on a flower and is collecting pollen, specifically collecting pollen on purpose, it has to be a female bee. They are the only things that are doing that. So the best place to look for solitary bees are where bees are doing bee things. So at flowers, collecting pollen or drinking nectar is a great place. You see this little fella here having a good old sup of the nectar on this dandelion. And it's kind of, this nectar is a really sugary drink. It's like Red Bull for bees. It's what fuels them, it what keeps them working and keeps them going. This one's a male, but you will see females at the flower collecting pollen onto their body. So if it's on a flower collecting pollen and packing it onto its body, it has to be a female bee. You'll also see them at nest sites, digging holes and making nests, at bee hotels, but you'll also see around the nests cuckoo bees lurking about, waiting for the female bee who's making the nest to leave so they can go about their nefarious business of laying an egg in someone else's nest. So I don't know if this video will play. Yeah, so here we are. I always think watching a bee dig a hole is a fantastic thing. This tiny little bee is digging down into the soil to make a home for its young. To me, it looks like a sort of terrier on a beach, sort of kicking the sand out behind itself. But it's just amazing to think that this tiny little insect can make a nest burrow and cells within that nest for its young in the ground. And some of the ground is really, really hard packed, and they still manage to sort of burrow down in it to make a nest. So now you know where to look for bees, nest aggregations, or generally on flowers. I want to sort of show you 3 bees that you can go out and see now in spring. And these are 3 that you can identify 2 species from a standing start very easily. Or if you get a photograph, you can tell what species it is. As I've said, there's 260, 270 species of solitary bee. Some of them are really difficult to identify, but these are 3 that will be starting to emerge now that you can identify out and about from a photograph or from just looking at them right now. The first one is Andrena cineraria, which is known as sort of the ashy mining bee, the mime bee, the panda bee. I like to call it the, where's my pointer gone? There, mustachy mining bee, because they have this brilliant sort of hirsute hipster sort of look about them. And this is really the only bee in the UK that is a pure black and white. It's quite a large bee, maybe the size of a maybe 10, 15 millimeters long. So that's large for bees, but it's very fluffy and it's just black and white. And at the moment, they'll be out and about on dandelions collecting pollen. Both the males and females look very, very similar. So that's the ashy mining bee. So it's a really good one if you want to go out and look at on dandelions and stuff, and you see this black and white thing, furry thing collecting pollen, it will be ashy mining bee. We've then got Andrena fulva, which is the tawny mining bee. This one's really beautiful orange with a black head. Again, it kind of looks like it's the only bee that's this color. It nests in sort of lawns and things and makes this volcano of earth. And it kind of looks like a parrot flying through the jungle when you see it out and about flying. It's a beautiful orange amongst the green. The last one is early mining bee, Andrena hemero, or red bum mining bee, as I call it, because it's this beautiful foxy body, and it's got this flash of orange fur on its tail. So the red bum mining bee, and these again will be out and about at the moment. So that's why bees are wonderful. I love them. I'm really interested in them. They look fantastic. They're doing amazing things. But what else have bees actually done for us? The beauty and diversity of flowers is in a large extent due to bees because of their pollination and because of their evolving in line with and in combination with flowers. So a lot of what we see as beauty in the natural world is down to bees being fantastic pollinators. Hopefully we've all heard that how important bees are to food plants and the pollination of crops. Much of the food we consume is reliant on insect and especially bee pollination. So without bees, we wouldn't have a very interested or varied diet. So that's what they do for us. They can inspire us. They can be good for our well-being if we go out and look at them. They can sort of make us appreciate the beauty of the world. They can provide food for us. But what can we do for the bees? What can we do to help preserve and conserve them? Bees basically need four things to survive and be successful. They need food, somewhere to raise their young, somewhere to shelter, and somewhere to hibernate. For food, they need pollen for their young and nectar from flowers. No mow May is a great place to start. Not cutting everything and leaving flowers is great, but just 1 month. Bees are out all of summer, all of spring. So sort of no mow May and then, oh, we'll let the flowers grow again at the beginning of May next year isn't great. We need to have flowers all year round. So no mow May is brilliant, but no mow all the time on some of your garden is a brilliant thing. If you're going to plant flowers for bees, choose native species if you can. Avoid the multi-headed or showy hybrids. Different size of bee, prefer different size of flower. So a variety of different types of flowers is really, really important. Even if you've only got sort of a window box with plants in pots, they can still provide food and shelter for bees. So anyone, anywhere can do lots of stuff to support bees. Somewhere to nest, bee hotels, standing deadwood, earth banks, undisturbed vegetation, and unmown lawns are really, really important. Somewhere to shelter, untidy vegetation. Nature isn't neat. Just leaving a little corner of your garden unmown is really, really important. This little bee here is actually asleep. It's a male asleep in a flower. The males can't go back to a nest because they don't have one, so they will sleep inside flowers overnight. And you will often find this one and another bee inside specific flowers. So there's lots you can do that anyone can do to help protect and conserve bees and get interested in them. There are some schemes where you can actually get involved in the science of bees. There's something called the Flower Insect Timed Count, which again, I'll share a link later on, where you can actually do a 10-minute survey of flowers and count insect visitors, and it feeds into a national pollinator monitoring scheme. There's also biological recording, where from the 3 bees that hopefully if you re-watch this on the video, you can then go out and identify. You can submit these records to a national scheme to help conserve and look after these bees once we know where they are, or more importantly, where they aren't. Biological recording, I'm not going to go into because that's too much in depth. Hopefully, I mean, I'm whizzing through this because I know I'm running over time and Ant wants to do some questions. There's an amazing hidden world around us. There's these fascinating creatures, plants, and interactions that we can get into. They're an important element of every habitat. Anyone, anywhere can make a vital contribution to conservation and help protect these things. It's a brilliant community to be part of. Help and support is available. It's great for personal well-being. I've got so much out of just going and watching these things in the sun and knowing what's there and enjoying them. And you will, if you go out and look, encounter some amazing, beautiful and fascinating things. You can also help bees by getting to know them, by enjoying them, and by spreading the word about how wonderful they are.